Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today we're going to be talking about some bisexual books. So I thought it being Pride Month would be a great opportunity to talk about some bi books. But I do just want to do like a bit of housekeeping before I get into the books, because I don't think all of the characters in these books or all of the authors attached to these books have self-identified as bisexual. I think for the majority of these books there are characters who have self-identified as bi, but I just don't want to like 100% trust my memory that that is the case. Like some of them might identify as pansexual or queer, and using that kind of precise terminology is something that I kind of struggle with in relation to like my own sexuality. Like if I just want to give someone like a really simple explanation, I will say that I'm bisexual, but really it's slightly more nuanced than that. Like if I just want to give someone a super simple explanation and like shorthand, I will say bisexual, because that tends to be a term that most people have an understanding of what it means. Really, I feel like the term queer is more accurate when it comes to my own sexuality. But across these books and or authors, I felt like I was seeing representation of my identity as a queer / bisexual person. Anyway, happy Pride Month. Let's talk about some books. Now, I'm going to talk about one that I'm pretty sure most people who are watching this video will have already read, but it cannot be recommended enough. I really want to recommend to you Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. So this is the first volume in the series. There are 4 volumes out and a 5th one to come. You may also be familiar with the Netflix adaptation, so series 1 of that is already out with series 2 to come, and I cannot fucking wait. But this series of graphic novels is about 2 teenage boys named Charlie and Nick, who have never met before, but one day they are made sit together in class and a friendship and then something more begins to blossom between the 2 of them. And over the course of the series of graphic novels, we are following them kind of beginning to understand their sexuality, developing an understanding of their sexuality, how their experiences of realizing that they like boys are similar, but also have a number of differences to them as well. I really felt a lot of connection with the character of Nick, who is the bisexual character. He kind of goes through that experience of being like, well, I definitely like girls, so I don't understand how I could possibly be gay, but I definitely have feelings for boys as well. And there are a lot of elements of his identity and personality that you might typically stereotype as being straight. I love this series of graphic novels. I love reading graphic novels because you can get so much from the imagery just as much as you're getting from the text, and they're also super quick and cozy reads. You would read the whole series in an afternoon. This next book you may have heard me talk about in my most recent reading roundup, and that was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a romance novel that follows the story of Faye, who has struggled with romantic relationships in the aftermath of her losing her husband. Faye begins to tiptoe into a new relationship, and at the beginning of this relationship, it seems like the person she's getting to know is going to be really patient with her boundaries. He's very much okay for it to have a foundation in friendship before the relationship progresses any further. However, in a pretty whirlwind set of circumstances, Faye meets someone else, and it's someone that she really shouldn't have feelings for, but she has this instant connection and chemistry with this person. While the main love stories that we see from Faye are with men, she is very much bisexual and speaks openly about the relationships that she has had with women, and in particular the relationship that she has had with one of her very best friends. And as well as that, there was also representation of bisexuality in men, which is something that I think is super underrepresented when it comes to queer literature, and especially in this case, it was a slightly older man as well. I loved the conversations around sexuality between those 2 bisexual characters, and it just reminded me how amazing it feels when you are able to talk to someone who just gets it. You don't really need to do any explaining. You can just talk freely knowing that the other person kind of gets it. I really want to recommend The Magnificent Sons by Justin Myers. I loved this book. I think this book is absolutely fantastic. So this is about Jack, who is 29 years old, and he seems like he really has his life completely together. He has a really steady job that has prospects to it. He has a steady girlfriend that he's been with for quite a long time. But there's something about his life where he's just not feeling fulfilled. He's not feeling happy. When Jake's younger brother Trick comes out to his whole family as gay, he is met with so much positivity. He is embraced, he is celebrated, he is loved. And it prompts Jake to begin thinking about his own sexuality, his sexuality that he repressed for so many years. You know, when he was growing up, he was told a lot of things about kind of what a man should be like in a very stereotypical way. And his younger brother, Trick, because he presented in a way that was more outwardly kind of effeminate, he wasn't faced with the same kind of pressures that Jake was to perform masculinity. So Jake has this whole coming out and coming to understand experience with his sexuality when he's 29 years old, and it's met with a range of different responses. His family don't necessarily understand him being bisexual in the same way that they understand Trick being gay. I thought this book was really insightful, really page-turning, deals with an experience that is really common but not really spoken about that much. And yeah, massively recommend this one. Next, I want to recommend a young adult novel, and that is I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston, who you may also know for her adult books as well. So this is a book that is set in the lead up to the graduation from a Christian school in America. Shara Wheeler is the principal's daughter, she is the perfect daughter, she is the prom queen. But Shara disappears in very mysterious circumstances. And before she disappeared, she kissed a girl named Chloe. And Chloe is kind of her, like, school rival. They're always competing to be, like, the top dog, top of the class. But it was not just Chloe that Shara kissed before she vanished. She also kissed her boyfriend and a boy that she is neighbours with and has this slightly confusing friendship with. She has left behind a string of clues for these three people to try and figure out where she is, what has happened, and we are following on for the ride, following the mystery. And I just found that setup so fun, and I loved the dynamic between all of the different characters. I thought they bounced off each other really well and had these really interesting moments of unity as well as conflict. And I also found it really interesting how this touched on sexuality in a small town and having a progressive family in a small town versus a conservative family in a small town, what role Christianity can play in you coming to terms with your sexuality. And I just found Shara such a fun character. Like, she is a messy queen, she is like main character syndrome central, but I loved her. Next, I want to recommend Until I Met You by Amber Rose Gill. Now, as far as I can recall, I don't think there are any like outwardly queer relationships or moments in this book, but I did want to highlight it because the author herself is bisexual. It is Amber Rose Gill, who you may also know from her series of Love Island. She won Love Island, and I think she is fantastic. She is an openly bisexual woman, currently in a relationship with a woman. So I did want to highlight her romance book. This would be amazing summer reading. So it is about Samantha, who is meant to be going on like the holiday of a lifetime. She is launching her travel blog. She is going to her best friend's wedding and hopefully being proposed to by her long-term partner at the same time. But that is not what happens. She ends up going to this wedding that is in Tobago, and she is going alone. She is going single. Enter Roman, who is disillusioned with his corporate job on Wall Street and wants to set up a new life in Tobago. And of course, a connection and romance starts to blossom between the two of them. And as they get more and more fields, they need to figure out what they're gonna do next about this situation. I did just think this was like super fun, really easy reading, like perfect to read by a pool, perfect to read in the sun. So definitely one worth packing in your suitcase if you're going away somewhere hot. Back to young adult fiction, I want to recommend Wonderland by Juno Dawson. Now, you will find a whole range of queer characters across Juno Dawson's books, but I specifically wanted to talk about Wonderland because I adore this book and I don't have enough opportunities to talk about it. You may know that I am a huge Alice's Adventures in Wonderland fan, so when there was a young adult novel written by Juno Dawson that was inspired by Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, sign me the fuck up. While this is young adult fiction, I would definitely say it's on like the older end of YA. Like, there are a lot of kind of like parties and drugs and alcohol and sexual experiences that are covered in this book, so it is very much on like kind of the older end of YA. So this is about Alice, of course, who lives in this kind of life of luxurious high-end privilege. Alice also suffers from a number of kind of mental health issues. She's also dealing with her sexuality and the complications in her life because she is trans. One day, Alice's friend Bunny goes missing, and she goes on this mission to try and find out what happened to Bunny, and this leads her to this super elite sort of underground party called Wonderland, where A lot of weird stuff is happening, a lot of like not okay stuff is happening. It's about the internal battles that Alice is having in her own head, but also the people that are kind of out to get her. And over the course of her trying to find Bunny, she's really finding out more about herself and her own experiences. As I said, I'm a huge Alice's Adventures in Wonderland fan, so I immediately just like ate this up. And just talking about this book is making me really want to reread it. I loved this book so much. Another book that you may have heard me talk about recently in my reading wrap-ups was Reputation by Lex Croucher. This is a really chunky book, but once you get into the flow of it, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like a really like breezy read. There's so much humor in it as well that really propelled the novel along. So this is a novel that is set in the Regency era, but it definitely has a kind of like modern energy to it in the way I think that Bridgerton does. So we're following middle-class Georgiana, who has been abandoned by her parents and sent to live with her quite boring uncle and aunt in a new town. She is having a bunch of these like really dull dinner parties until she meets Francis, who is able to open up her world to the debauchery of the Regency period, to how the young people are having fun in that time period. There are wild parties, there are drunken conversations, there are mysterious young men who want the women's attention, but there are also secret relationships that people aren't really talking about. I love how the depiction of sexuality was woven into this book. For much of the book, it is depicted as this kind of like open secret. Like you kind of know people of the same gender are hooking up, but just like people don't really talk about it that much. And it's not really presented as that big of a deal either. There's maybe a moment of like pause, but that's sort of it. And I think representations of bisexuality throughout history is so important, because I think a lot of the time it can be kind of dismissed as like this kind of more recent thing, like it's very modern, and that's just not the case. Like we have always been here. The second last book that I want to talk about is another one that I'm sure most of you have already read, but it cannot be shouted about enough, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is a book about a fictitious Hollywood icon, Evelyn Hugo. Evelyn's life has always been shrouded in a lot of mystery. People have like a lot of questions about what really went on in the background of her life and the background to a bunch of like really high profile like news stories and scandals, etc. But Evelyn has never spoken about this before until she invites a relatively unknown magazine reporter to record her life story. Evelyn is gonna spill all. And Evelyn's life story follows her moving to Los Angeles in the 1950s all the way to her sort of disappearance from public life in the 1980s. And the story of her life is kind of structured around her 7 husbands. Yes, 7. But along the way, there were also some relationships with women, and Evelyn's bisexuality is something that is very much at the core of this book. And there's a lot of discussion around what it was like to be queer at that moment in time, and also what it was like to be queer when you had such a significant public profile and such a level of fame and celebrity. I definitely related to that assumption that people make when they assume that you are straight because you've had a lot of relationships with men, but the relationships that people kind of know about aren't the full story of your sexuality. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think most people have read this book now. It is absolutely phenomenal. You will read it so quickly. If you haven't already read it, please do. It is such an incredible book, and I am such a big Taylor Jenkins Reid fan. And I'm going to finish up with another young adult book, and that is Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating by Adiba Jagadar. This is a book and an author that I've spoken about quite a few times on the channel. This is a young adult fake dating romance, and fake dating is one of my absolute favorite tropes. I love that dynamic of like, what are people like when they are performing what they perceive a relationship should be like. And this book is of course about the relationship between Hani and Ishu, who enter into this fake dating relationship because they think it will be mutually beneficial to both of them. So Hani is really popular at school. She has a good group of friends, or so she thinks. She's really quite popular. But when she comes out as bisexual, people, including her friends, don't really believe her because they're like, well, we've never seen you date a girl. Then we have Ishu, who is a massive academic overachiever, but she's always comparing herself to her also academically overachieving older sister. Ishu would really like to become head girl, but that relies on being popular, and she is not that. So she thinks if her and Hani start dating, people will believe that Hani is bisexual and Ishu will gain popularity. And as always happens with fake dating romances, over the course of them pretending to be in a relationship, they realize that they do actually have connection and chemistry, etc. I really connected with this because it is set in Ireland, so it's in an Irish secondary school, and there were lots of elements of the response to someone coming out that I recognized from my own school experience. I think things are definitely a lot more kind of open and welcoming for queer kids in a lot of Irish schools now. Definitely not all of them, and it's definitely not completely seamless, but I think it's definitely been progress since like when I was in secondary school. But a lot of that experience I did recognize in this book. So that is it. They are all of the books I'm going to talk to you about today. Do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, if you liked them, or leave me a recommendation for a book that has a queer character that you really enjoyed. If you don't have anything in particular to say, but you want to let me know that you are here, leave me a rainbow emoji, because that seems quite appropriate. Once again, happy Pride, everyone. I hope you are doing well, and I will speak to you in my next video.